Hello everyone, thank you once again for joining me today. Let's begin our story. For decades, both Chinese and Russian observers have shared an uncomfortable realization. America's nuclear submarine fleet represents a level of strategic dominance that no rival can easily match. It is a quiet truth, rarely spoken publicly but deeply acknowledged in military circles. Beneath the surface of the world's oceans, the United States maintains a shadow empire of steel, silence, and deterrence. Russian media often boast of their own ballistic missile submarines, the Borei and Delta classes, as symbols of enduring power. Yet even in those same columns, there is a tone of unease, a recognition that the U.S. Navy's silent service holds the upper hand, not only in quantity but in quality. While Russia and China build fleets to project image, the U.S. builds one to guarantee survival. The American Ohio-class submarines and their future replacement, the Columbia-class, are often described by Russian commentators as floating fortresses or cities of steel beneath the sea. Each carries a devastating payload of multiple nuclear warheads, capable of erasing entire nations if deterrence fails. But what disturbs Moscow most is not the destructive power, it is the invisibility. Reports from defense analysts admit that U.S. submarines can patrol undetected across every ocean, forming an unbreakable second strike shield in any conceivable conflict. Even if American bases and carriers were destroyed, the submarines would endure, ready to respond. This concept, known as Sachard retaliation, defines the strategic logic of the U.S. Navy's undersea force. The Russians know it well. Their own navy has sought to replicate it since the Cold War, yet continues to struggle with noise levels, maintenance, and patrol duration. Russian newspapers cautiously admit that despite advances in the Borei class, American vessels remain quieter, faster, and operationally superior. U.S. crews train for longer periods, months beneath the sea, under intense psychological and technical preparation. Their logistics chains extend globally, supported by decades of infrastructure that no rival can easily recreate. One editorial from Moscow once put it bluntly: the Americans do not need to boast of their submarines. Their silence is their message. That line encapsulates the unease. For Russian admirals, the American fleet's greatest weapon is not a missile, it is discipline and patience. U.S. submarines operate under a philosophy of continuous readiness, always invisible, always capable, and always prepared to act without warning. Every patrol is part of a rhythm perfected over half a century. Each commander inherits not only the hardware, but a culture, a doctrine refined through generations of quiet vigilance. In contrast, Russian and Chinese submariners face different realities. Funding shortages, aging shipyards, and limited training time reduce reliability. Their patrol ranges remain shorter, their missions more constrained. While their governments speak of parity, insiders acknowledge the truth. The gap is measured not only in decibels of silence but in decades of experience. China's newer Jin-class submarines and Russia's Borei fleet demonstrate ambition, but not yet mastery. Western intelligence reports suggest these vessels can be tracked more easily than their American counterparts, whose acoustic signatures are nearly indistinguishable from the sea itself. To the strategic planners in Moscow and Beijing, this is not merely a technical concern, it is psychological. A submarine that cannot be found can never be deterred. The Columbia class, expected to enter service in the 2030s, deepens that fear. It will feature next-generation quieting systems, advanced nuclear reactors that require no refueling, and digital control architectures that reduce crew workload. Russian analysts privately call it the ghost of the ocean floor, a vessel that could vanish for months, surfacing only to remind the world that it exists. The endurance of the American system is what truly unsettles its rivals. The program's funding remains stable across administrations. The training pipeline is constant and the industrial base, though aging, still delivers with precision. Unlike many nations that build weapons for display, the U.S. Navy's submarines are built for permanence, a strategy designed to last not years, but generations. In Russian commentaries, this acknowledgement carries an almost philosophical tone. They note that America's undersea power is not driven by propaganda or heroism, but by methodical repetition, the belief that deterrence is sustained, not through noise, but through reliability. It is a paradoxical form of dominance, feared precisely because it remains unseen. For the Russian public, such discussions are often subdued, couched in language about balance or strategic stability. But the experts know better. They see the pattern when America's submarines disappear from view. It is not weakness, it is warning. The silence of the U.S. Fleet is not emptiness, it is presence. In the end, what terrifies Moscow and intrigues Beijing is not the number of American submarines, but the system behind them, a machine of planning, training, and quiet endurance. As one Russian naval analyst concluded, the Americans have turned patience into a weapon. Their power hides beneath the waves feared, because it is silent, and respected because it endures. If America's nuclear submarines inspire fear in Moscow, it is not because of what they reveal, but because of what they conceal. Russian naval analysts have long admitted that the quietness of the U.S. submarine force is its most decisive weapon, a weapon that kills not by sound, but by the absence of it. To them, American submarines are not ships. They are phantoms of the deep, slipping through the world's oceans unseen, unheard, and often unfathomable. In Russian publications, these vessels are described as ghosts in the ocean, so silent that even advanced sonar systems struggle to detect them. Tracking a U.S. submarine is compared to chasing the wind in the dark. This quietness, Russian observers acknowledge, is not a coincidence. It is the result of half a century of relentless research, experimentation, and industrial precision, a culture of silence forged through science. Moscow has tried to respond with pride. It points to the Borei-class ballistic missile submarines and the Yasin-class attack submarines as proof of its technological rebirth. Yet even Russian defense magazines admit the truth. Their own subs remain acoustically louder than their American counterparts. Every decibel of sound in the ocean is a signal, and every signal is a potential death sentence. A submarine that can be heard is a submarine that can be hunted. And in the unforgiving mathematics of undersea warfare, silence equals survival. American engineers have mastered this equation by isolating machinery on magnetic mounts, coating hulls with sound-absorbing tiles, and refining propulsor designs to eliminate cavitation noise. They have created vessels that blend perfectly into the natural murmur of the sea. Russian writers sometimes describe this as technological camouflage machines so quiet, they disappear into the ocean's own heartbeat. In classified reports cited by Russian media, analysts admit that even their newest submarines, though improved, still trail the acoustic performance of the American Virginia and Ohio classes by an entire generation. But what troubles Moscow even more than hardware is human precision. Russian commentaries concede that American submariners undergo training regimens that are longer, more rigorous, and more consistent than their Russian counterparts. Crew members practice endless emergency drills, sensor interpretation, and quiet running protocols until every motion becomes instinct. They train in simulators that replicate real oceanic conditions, pressure shifts, sonar interference, and tactical deception scenarios, allowing them to react with calm reflexes even under psychological stress. Where Russian crews rotate frequently and face funding interruptions, American crews build careers beneath the sea. Experience compounds, intuition deepens. The result is a human-machine symbiosis that cannot be built overnight. In Russian naval circles, this difference is sometimes described with reluctant respect. Articles in military journals speak of discipline as stealth, noting that the U.S. Navy's advantage lies not only in equipment but in culture. From Annapolis to the submarine bases at Kings Bay and Bangor, a single doctrine guides every sailor: you are the noise you make. Be less. That philosophy is repeated endlessly in training and practice. American submariners learn to treat silence as both science and sacred duty. Even routine tasks, closing a valve, shifting a wrench, operating a pump, are performed with measured control. Every sound that escapes a hull is a potential signal to the enemy, and thus, a breach of trust. Russian commentators, often nationalistic, struggle to explain this difference. They emphasize patriotism, technology, or endurance, but quietly admit that the U.S. Navy has perfected the discipline of invisibility. It is not a dramatic triumph, but a sustained one. No parades, no slogans, just decades of consistency, method, and professionalism. Where Russian submarines project power through visibility, the American fleet defines it through absence. This is the paradox that unnerves Moscow. The greatest threat does not roar, it waits. The most dangerous weapon is not the one that strikes first, but the one that can strike last, unseen, and unstoppable. For every Russian submarine that sails, there is the silent question: where are the Americans now? That question haunts every sonar operator, every admiral, every strategist. Because in the art of undersea warfare, knowing is survival, and not knowing is fear. The U.S. Navy's submarines embody that fear perfectly: machines designed to disappear, and men trained to vanish. Together, they form not merely a fleet, but an idea power that hides, patience that endures, and silence that kills. It is this union of technology and temperament, stealth and discipline that makes the American submarine force not just formidable, but mythical. The sea itself becomes its ally, concealing its movements, amplifying its legend. For Moscow, that is the most unsettling truth of all. America's strength lies not in what it shows, but in what it refuses to reveal. When Russian commentators analyze America's nuclear submarine fleet, one theme echoes again and again: endurance. In their reports, American submarines are described not as machines of destruction, but as instruments of patience, vessels built to disappear and endure. U.S. boats can vanish beneath the waves for months, powered by reactors that require no refueling for decades. This simple fact redefines what it means to control the oceans. Each American submarine can operate as a self-contained world, generating its own power, air, and water. While surface fleets depend on ports, weather, and supply lines, the silent service exists independently, its reach limited only by human endurance. For Moscow's strategists, this autonomy represents a nightmare. A fleet that cannot be blockaded, cornered, or anticipated. The endurance gap is not theoretical, it is measurable. An Ohio-class submarine can patrol for 90 days without surfacing, maintaining communication through encrypted satellite bursts that reveal nothing of its position. Its replacement, the Columbia-class, will extend this capability even further, staying hidden for months at a time. Every patrol becomes a quiet statement: we are here, even when unseen. For Russia, this means that American deterrence is never absent, it sleeps beneath the waves, invisible yet constant. In contrast, Russian submarines still face the constraints of infrastructure. Their patrol cycles are shorter, their supply routes narrower, and their maintenance schedules vulnerable to budget and dockyard limits. Russia's naval bases in Murmansk and Vladivostok serve as lifelines, but also as constraints. Every vessel must eventually return home. Without the global network of allied ports and logistical support that the U.S. Navy enjoys, Moscow's undersea fleet remains regional, not global. Editorials in Russian defense journals quietly concede this truth. They describe American submarines as strategic instruments of persistence, capable of staying in motion long after their adversaries must rest. Even when one submarine returns to port, another takes its place, sustained by a rotation system perfected over decades. This cycle ensures uninterrupted presence across multiple oceans. Where one hull ends its patrol, another begins, forming an unbroken chain of deterrence that no rival can replicate. Chinese analysts have a phrase for this phenomenon: wolves with infinite stamina. They note that endurance transforms power into unpredictability. An American submarine could be anywhere or everywhere. Its invisibility forces adversaries to plan for the unknown, stretching their defenses thin in every direction. As one Russian naval columnist wrote, "We prepare for where they might be, not where they are." But endurance is more than machinery, it is a mindset. American crews are trained not only to operate underwater, but to live underwater. Months of isolation test discipline, unity, and emotional stability. Submariners trained to function like a single organism, each member anticipating the next move, conserving energy and focus. To endure is to master both the machine and the mind. Russian officers, reading these accounts, often express reluctant admiration. They have made patience into a weapon. Endurance also shapes strategy. Because the U.S. fleet can remain deployed indefinitely, it does not need to react to crises, it is already there, waiting. Every ocean becomes a potential launch point, every silence a possible threat. This omnipresence shifts deterrence from reaction to permanence. Russia can build new submarines, but it cannot yet match the infrastructure, the global bases, the automated maintenance pipelines, the continuous readiness that turns machines into a living system. Western analysts call this structure the undersea continuum, a network so efficient that American submarines appear tireless. At any given moment, dozens operate in silent coordination, their positions unknown even to one another. The strategy is not to show presence, but to create the feeling of it, an invisible net woven through every ocean. For Moscow, this realization is sobering. The endurance gap means that the U.S. Navy does not need to prove its strength, it only needs to exist. Its deterrent effect comes from constancy. It never blinks, never leaves, never stops. Russia, bound by geography and budget, must cycle between visibility and absence. America never disappears. In the end, endurance is not just an advantage, it is the foundation of dominance. The surface fleet may glitter on parade, but the true empire lies beneath, quiet and eternal. American submarines do not win wars by firing, they win by waiting. They are reminders that in modern deterrence, time is the ultimate weapon. And so, for every fleet Russia launches and every speech it gives, the sea whispers a different truth, that power is not invisibility, but in permanence, and beneath those endless waves, America's endurance endures still. This is the spirit of America, loud, proud, and unbroken.